The newsroom. It's time now for the France 24 debate. Votes not in yet, but little suspense as Rwandans this Monday picked a parliament. Last time around, Paul Kagame's Rwandan Patriotic Front won 42 of 53 directly elected seats. At stake, an eventual constitutional reform that would lift term limits in 2017 when the man who directed the Tutsi-led rebellion that stopped the 1994 genocide is due to step down as president. In the nearly 2 decades that have followed, tiny Rwanda has been something of a donor darling, both because of obviously the horror that it endured back then and 8% annual growth, great strides in health and education, the stated aim of becoming the Singapore of Africa. Now, though, the West no longer turning a benevolent blind eye to abuses or skewed elections, not with the UN squarely blaming Rwanda for backing thuggish rebels in eastern Congo. Countries like the US, UK, Germany suspending or delaying aid to Kigali. Arguably, the country still has plenty of enemies at its doorsteps. But even when you're called Rwanda, do the ends justify the means? Today in the France 24 debate, we are looking at Kagame's Rwanda. And with us to talk about it from Berlin, she's the Great Lakes correspondent for German newspaper Tageszeitung, Simone Schlindwein. Thank you for being with us. Also with us here in the studio, Gérard, author of, among other things, Africa's World War, Congo, the Rwandan Genocide, and the Making of a Continental Catastrophe. Welcome. And welcome as well to AITV senior producer George KAZOLIAS. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation, and you have on Twitter and Facebook, our Twitter hashtag F24debate. Polls have now closed in Kigali, but even when there's little suspense over the outcome, there's always still a little bit of underlying tension, what with 2 weekend grenade attacks in the run-up to the vote. France 24's Duncan Woodside reported earlier from a polling station in the capital.
2/3 of parliamentary seats will be decided through the direct ballot today. The remaining third will be distributed according to selections from a list in order to increase the representation of women, the handicapped and youth. The outcome is not in doubt. The Rwanda Patriotic Front and its allies will surely record another resounding victory, and the only real question is whether they will surpass the 79% of the vote that they recorded last time.
And again, at stake is when those election ballots are counted, is whether or not term limits will be lifted for Paul Kagame. To a lot of our African viewers, Gérard, PRUNIER, there was this wave of democratization in the early 90s in a lot of countries where they did install term limits, and a lot of them have been lifted. There's been no statement made on the part of Paul Kagame regarding this, but that is what's expected.
It's more than likely, because if you look at Uganda, which is somehow a little bit of the same making in terms of ideological background and even physical presence, because Kagame fought in a civil war in Uganda. President Museveni did exactly that, and I'm afraid he's not the only one on the continent, and it's very unlikely that Mr. Kagame would accept to step down when there is a possibility of changing the constitution.
All right, Simone Schlindwein, you've done a lot of country hopping in your reporting in the Great Lakes region between Rwanda, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Uganda, Tanzania. Rwanda today, when you hear that it's trying to bill itself as Africa's Singapore, what's your thought?
First of all, the impression if you enter Rwanda, especially from the Congolese side, you think about you entering a different planet in terms of infrastructure, in terms of road quality, in terms of how this country looks like today. But the look is very different from, let's say, from how you analyze these countries. There are many, many layers of Rwanda today, because Rwanda is never in a certain stage. Rwanda is always in a process, where it comes from and where it goes to. It all plays along the way, how you analyze and how you understand Rwanda today. And it's never a certain level or a certain stage where Rwanda is. It comes from a certain point which was very brutal and very much, the country was very much destroyed, and goes into a direction which is a clear vision set up for the future in terms of development and infrastructure, and also in terms of the economic reforms and where this country and economic development goes to. And I guess, yes, it's always called the African Singapore or the Switzerland of Africa. I guess all these comparisons are a little bit wrong and not really right, because it's difficult to compare these countries in their really specific point of development. I would say Rwanda is definitely a developed country. If you look into the neighboring countries or see the neighboring countries in terms of infrastructure, it still lacks in terms of electricities and all these things. People demand power now, and investors demand power and better infrastructure. I guess Rwanda still has a long way to go.
All right,
this is where we are now in Rwanda. It's a real big turning point.
All right, a turning point, and as you say, many layers. A little over a year ago, France 24 followed the Rwandan president for Reporters, our investigative news magazine.
He dreams of Rwanda as an African Singapore. That means a focus on economic and social development rather than Western-style democracy. But it's the healthier, better housed and especially better educated citizens who can transform this rural landlocked country into a regional commercial hub. Kagame, a frequent Twitter user himself, is at ease with the students.
A special type of server. It's called Windows Multipoint Server 200.
During these public appearances, Paul Kagame is dead serious and keeps his emotions to himself. But during a Q&A session with the schoolgirls, another persona slowly emerges. He passionately urges the teenage girls not to look up to Western role models. It's yes you can, Rwandan style.
Don't waste any opportunity. If you have an opportunity for an education, seize it, hold it firmly, and run with it. Don't waste any time.
George KAZOLIAS, your reaction when you see those images?
Well, he has a captured audience, I would say.
Captive.
Yes, captive. Maybe captive and captured. I mean, these elections are a perfect example that you can have elections without really having democracy or freedom. Foregone conclusion. Two of the opposition parties are run by members of his government. I mean, it's just whereas real opposition people tend to either have violent ends or end up in prison. We can have a debate on whether we want real democracy in Rwanda today or not, but we can't debate whether there is or there isn't.
The challenges, though, are formidable, especially as Simone was saying, in the context of the current state of Rwanda, born of such sheer violence.
Well, I would even say that a lot of that infrastructure was built on violence as well. I mean, they didn't go into Zaire and occupy a big part of Zaire just to kill Hutus. They also brought out a lot of wealth and probably continue to do so. And that was made pretty public. I think where the international community has really failed is because of the genocide in Rwanda. A lot of things that should have been investigated have not been investigated, and people who spoke up, such as Emma Bonino, Carla Del Ponte, or Michael Uragan, were just sidelined to prevent these things from coming out. Once again, I mean, we can discuss whether we want them to come out or not. I mean, the problem is although we're forbidden to talk about ethnicity in Rwanda. It's forbidden. It exists. It exists. Okay, and according to the CIA report, it's still 85% Hutu, 15% Tutsi, and with 1% Twa mixed in there. And you know, I can look at Rwandans and not know who's a Tutsi or who's a Hutu, but they look at each other and they know. And you know, so it's just hogwash to say that you know there's no ethnicity, especially when you see that 50% of the wealth is in the hands of 10% of the Rwandan population. And you know, who's got power? Where is that wealth? There's got to be a lot of anger on the other side as well. I mean, fear has changed camp over the past 20 years.
All right, we can be joined now from Norwich, England, by Rwandan dissident René CLAUDEL MUGENZI. Thank you for being with us. Do you agree with what George KAZOLIAS just said, that, well, let's face it, we can ban talking about ethnicity, but it still matters a lot?
The Rwandan case, the ethnicity is a matter because it didn't go anywhere, despite that the government is trying to say there is no ethnicity, but ethnicity is still there in the people's mind. And also with the government, the way of the running services, also in trying to oppress one ethnicity to another, and the lack of equal opportunity for all, you will see that the ethnicity is still within the practice of the everyday of the government, also in the people's mind.
Simone Schlindwein, what have you seen in terms of that? Would you say that Rwanda, in that respect, is just as tense as it was nearly 2 decades ago, or would you say that things are evolving?
It is difficult to say as as tense as almost 20 years ago, because you cannot compare the situations right now and back then. I think it's interesting to compare Rwanda for a little bit to Burundi, where they have a similar constellation and ethnic problems in a history, but a different way to deal with these problems. And I guess in Burundi, if you compared the discourse and the debate of being either one or the other ethnic group is in everyday lives. And there are quotes in the army, in the parliaments, what, to say we need a certain representation of both ethnic or all 3 ethnic groups in the power institutions. In Rwanda, it's totally different. And in Rwanda, there is this big term or big motto of saying we are all Rwandans. And that's a construction of a nation which is necessary, I say, but which is the way how it's dealt with. Maybe this is much more on the Rwandese to deal with, to say that we want to have this debate, we want to have it like this or like this, or we want to talk about it or we don't want to talk about it. It's not for us foreigners to tell them how to deal with these things. And I think, but there's still a lot of unspoken tension in a black box. We journalists say from outside often Rwanda is a little bit a black box. We cannot really tell what's going on in between people's daily lives because the social culture is as well very closed. And it's not easy to talk about things, especially in open public spaces and newspapers and everything. So it's always a little bit difficult, but you maybe should question the Rwandans, how to deal with them, these things.
And over time, Kagame's critics and opponents coming more and more from those once in his inner circle. When France 24 followed him last year, he shrugged off allegations by former aides of being a war criminal.
In Africa, there is nobody who is popular with his people. No. If you are, then you are just a dictator. Popularism, being popular is only a preserve of developed countries. The others, when they are popular with the people, they are dictators. This is a standard people, the media set, and that's how they want to look at it.
Gérard PRUNIER, your reaction to what Paul Kagame said and to what Simone said about how difficult it is to read the dynamics between people inside Rwanda?
Well, actually, it's probably not so difficult. Because if you go back to before the genocide, let's say the good Habyarimana years, not the bad years in the late 80s, there was not all that much racial tension. The racial tension was very strong in the 60s, early 70s, and then it eased off. And, it comes in spurts. Right now, the genie has been pushed back in the bottle. It doesn't mean that it's gone, that things have disappeared. And the problem, I think, is by denying that there is an ethnic problem, you make it worse. It's a good old psychoanalytic thing. If you don't talk about things that go wrong, then they go even worse. It doesn't mean that, it should be encouraged. There is among the Hutu a lot of negationism. I mean, this is a problem you find especially in the migrant communities in Europe. They say, no, there was no genocide, which is absolutely unbearable, But at the same time, when you look at the way it is handled and the way it's, oh no, there was a genocide, but we will not talk about it. And we'll not talk about what it means, why it happened. It's just a very simplified version. And things, of course, means we're in front of a pressure cooker. The pressure is kept inside. It doesn't mean that it's smooth.
And perhaps it would help if we talked a little bit about what Kagame's Kidogo did on their march to Kinshasa as well. Emma Bonino, who was the European commissioner at the time, put the number of people killed by his soldiers at 500,000.
All right, we're just going to tell you on Twitter, Phil saying that we should be asking the panelists to describe their vision of democracy. What would it look like, and who would it include, exclude? And to talk about it, we're pleased to be joined from Brussels by the director of Kigali-based radio station Contact FM, political analyst Albert RUDATSIMBURWA. And Albert, let me begin by apologizing for the technical issues we had at the top of this show. That question from the viewer, what should democracy look like in Rwanda?
Well, it should look like, I guess, anywhere. It's just that we still have to remember that democracy is a process all the time. I mean, the state of democracy that we see now in the West is not the same as in 1789. So Rwanda is building a democracy after what everyone knows that what happened in 94, a genocide. But it's not just building a democracy just out of the air. It's also trying to build a modern state. A modern state meaning also that a modern state, the modern nations, classes change, that you don't have the traditional classes anymore, and that you're building new classes. All of that. Building a democracy also, it's a bit like there is a business plan in there. From what threshold can you really say, from what level of revenue, of average revenue for the citizens, does the democracy work?
All right, we're going to pick up on that point when we come back. We have to take a quick break. Stay with us. This is the France 24 debate.